He's pursuing solutions, longer-term solutions, which are not in the interests of other allies. And he's doing so by actually alienating other allies as well.
Tobias, just what's the mood following that J.D. Vance speech?
Everybody's absolutely baffled here. I mean, given the turmoil as to where European security is, the confusion of Trump's plans to end the Ukraine war, there was much anticipation here that the Vice President would offer clarity, vision, leadership. But none of this was there in this this populist lecture that we were given today. Everybody is really scratching their heads with no answers, no guidance about where America wants to go. And most importantly, its relationship with Europe, as well as what happens next with Ukraine. Instead, as you've been implying, this was a focus on the more of these cultural aspects, the populist discussions that were very much part of the US election campaign. So bewilderment, really.
And has there been any other readout from American spokespeople there following J.D. Vance's speech? Because often in these conferences, there's lots of extra briefing that happens in the margins. Has there been anything else about the germane issues, security, troops, Ukraine, or are they just sticking with what J.D. Vance said in the speech?
I think what's happened is that Trump has put out a position which he's now having to row back from. And the message has come through to Munich, to the US team, simply just don't say anything about it right now. Do not comment, do not venture, do not give any indication as where things might go as they take stock as to what should really happen next. The Defense Secretary, US Defense Secretary, isn't even coming here. And the consequence of that is, as I say, that there is a void in understanding. The Munich Security Conference is that place, usually where, as you'd implied, behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of talk that goes on. The back channels that allow clarity, the detail as to what's said on the main podium. But when on the main podium you avoid the big issues of the day, the elephant in the room, then that does sow an awful lot of confusion indeed. So Republicans and Democrats, and indeed many of the leaders across Europe, are unsure as to where all this goes.
Well, let's bring in Robert Fox, defence editor at the London Evening Standard. Robert, what do you think's going on? What do you think was going on with that speech?
I think we have to go back to Bannon and Project 2025. It's that absolutely DOC, as in vintage, wine vintage, a populist speech full of impressions, full of emotions, interfering in allies' internal politics, and actually nothing of real substance. Because, as Tobias was saying, one would expect to get the first coordinates of the roadmap towards peace negotiations and balancing relations, not only between the US and Russia over Ukraine, bringing peace and some kind of ceasefire to Ukraine, and actually how NATO will emerge. I think by default, the message to European NATO is very, very strong, is that you've got to do things on your own. You've got to sort things out between the principal European allies, the Nordics, the Baltics, and then the big three, Britain, France, and Germany. And that has come out of the informal defence ministers meeting in Brussels, led by Mark Rutte. I think it's quite ominous how vague and woolly and sort of firing from the hip so much of what the Vance-Trump team is doing in foreign policy right now.
And as you say, there's just been so much inconsistency, because we had sort of one position coming out on Thursday night, which was, you're on your own. And then we had another message from J.D. Vance saying, well, actually, maybe America might be prepared to deploy troops and impose sanctions on Russia. Then we've had messages from Trump saying, well, actually, maybe it's time to let Putin come back into the G8. So lots of confusing messages. But Robert, what do European leaders do now? I mean, how do they organise themselves? Or is it sort of every country for themselves? Is it time to just ramp up the defence spending? What do European countries do?
Certainly not going for themselves. It is absolutely time to get down to the homework now, leading up to the major NATO summit at the end of June in The Hague, which is the native heath for the new-ish but incredibly accomplished Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte. This is what seems to be so lacking. I wonder whether Tobias would agree with it, with the pronouncements we've had from Hegseth, we've had from Rubio, we've had from J.D. Vance and from Trump himself. There doesn't seem to have been an awful lot of homework going on here. And I think that as of today, what you're saying, Aisha, is right on the ticket in that NATO is an alliance, funnily enough. It's not an autonomy. It's not a playground just for the biggest beast in the park, namely America. It's vital for America, and America is vital for NATO. But it is an alliance, and allies have their role. And I think that this is where what is now called the Trump sovereigntism, not isolationism, it's something more than that. The buzzword I gather in Washington is sovereigntism. But actually, you cannot be nobby-no-mates in this. However powerful you are, you do need allies.
Tobias, do you want to comment on that? You know, how does NATO go about strengthening its allies? And also, we know Europe is very fractured at the moment, just in terms of European leadership. Lots of European leaders are facing challenges. You've got big elections coming up in Germany very soon. Macron is facing pressures in France. How do European leaders come together?
Yes, the benefit of the Munich Security Conference, separate from trying to digest and unpick the confusion that we're now dealing with from the American side, is that the rest of Europe can get together and realize that whatever happens next, greater effort will be required to increase our defense postures, to start looking after things ourselves. John Healey will take the stage shortly. I hope he will recognize, the British public will recognize, and all political parties, that we do need to spend more on our own defence, that we need to see greater British leadership, greater British cooperation with our European continental allies, because whatever happens, America will be stepping back, dialing away from their involvement in security matters in Europe. So there is going to be, as America goes through this sort of backlash that they're receiving now, the word appeasement and capitulation very much attached to the current plan that they put forward with Ukraine. But we now need to take stock and recognize operationally what happens next. Who's going to provide that security? Geostrategically, NATO, how is that going to work moving forward? And actually more widely internationally, what's going to happen to our world order, which is eroding? These are bigger questions that we need to recognize, that America is less interested in these things, but that doesn't mean to say that they should be dropped. And there's a space there for other countries, particularly Britain, to step into.
And just on that point about the world order, or the weakening of this world order, Robert Fox, I mean, it is, as Tobias was saying there, that's the sort of broader existential question. Do you think that the arrival of Trump and this very unusual form of leadership, none of the old orthodoxies, ripping up the rule books, new sheriff in town, shooting from the hip, to quote your words, Robert, is the world order fundamentally changed now? Is there no going back if America is not going to be part of it?
The nature of the dispensation, with the power of the Western Alliance, which emerged from 1943 to 1945 through the UN and then NATO in the late 1940s, that is up for grabs now. And it should be concentrating minds above all in Whitehall. You cannot have a budget-neutral defence review, which is what Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer seem to have aimed at. They cannot treat defence, as Tobias was indicating, defence and security as a bolt-on nuisance, which the Treasury loathes, an embarrassment that detracts much-needed money for elsewhere, particularly the ballooning welfare and health budget. The threats are real. We have to do it with allies, and some of the parts of the alliance which we don't give too many headlines to are very, very effective. The Nordics, the Nordic Arc, the Baltics, they look to Britain through various organizations like the Joint Expeditionary Force. They really do talk, and they talk imaginatively about what needs to be done. And by the way, look at the majority of the powers of the Joint Expeditionary Force, the 10-power force within NATO, and what they've felt that they have had to do with their defence budgets. It doesn't seem to have sunk in Whitehall in some way. The Dutch, for instance, in 2 or 3 years have all but doubled their defence budget. They say it's not a luxury, it's an absolute necessity.
And final question to you, Tobias. One of our listeners has messaged in saying, you're all talking so negatively about Trump, but he made the call and he has got negotiations open. What would you say to that listener, Tobias?
I would agree. And I very much want Donald Trump to use that very powerful convening power, but use it sensibly. And when you then say, I'm going to address an issue which has been there for 3 years, a terrible war in the east of Europe, but you go straight to the adversary and let him off the hook, that's when things go wrong. That's when stakeholders here feel that they've been disenfranchised. That's where you end up with a model that rewards the bully. And it doesn't give us a lasting solution. It's a temporary stay until, I'm afraid, Putin is able to rearm, regroup, and do it all over again. So yes, we welcome Donald Trump coming to the table, showing interest, as he's doing in the Middle East as well. But he's pursuing solutions, longer-term solutions, which are not in the interests of other allies. And he's doing so by actually alienating other allies as well. And all these stakeholders are required. And the irony here is that us distracted by Russia for another 5 years means that we actually can't help the United States in working together for an off-ramp to deal with China. That is the longer-term geostrategic challenge.
Well, a really interesting conversation. Grateful to Tobias Ellwood for joining us again live from the Munich Security Conference, and great to catch up with Robert Fox, defence editor at the London Evening Standard. Someone's messaging saying, unusual leadership, ? How about a complete betrayal of Ukraine by the appeaser of war criminals, Trump? And Barney from Faversham messages in saying, perhaps we're panicking a little. Remember, Trump only has 4 years, which will go by very quickly. By then, somebody, brackets, hopefully still a Republican, close brackets, more reasonable will be in the White House, Barney. Well, it is another 4 years, but it's not even been 4 weeks yet, and a lot has happened. I mean, it's just going to be really interesting to see how this all kind of unfolds. I mean, maybe we are panicking, but you know, the gentlemen I've been speaking to are not prone to panic. I think everybody is worried about the way things are at the moment, and really worried about the knock-on effects for the rest of Europe.